Thank you so much, Erika. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much to the Forest Service for having us. This is a really exciting topic for Sarah and I to speak about together. And anyway, happy to be here. So without further ado, I will go forward. So this image is a rendering of Lower Manhattan in the year 1609. Yes, this is New York at one time. When Europeans arrived in New York was 1609, and this is what Lower Manhattan looked like. Few people have captured the interconnectedness of our built and natural environments better than Erika Svendsen. Some of you may know of his book Mannahatta or his subsequent project called Wailakia. This is, not what people think of when they think of New York City, but I think it's an important reminder that living in nature does not need to render it unrecognizable, because at this time, when this rendering was, envisioned, there had already been 2,000 years of human habitation here from the Lenape Native American tribe. So here on the left is another view of Lower Manhattan that is probably what you expected to see during a talk about New York City. But the photo on the right is of the other end of Manhattan. It's in Woodhill Park at the northern tip. The forests and wetlands here and all over the city can serve as a reminder that we live in a built environment that is overlaid on top of a natural one. Nature is woven into all parts of urban life, but it's still visible in our large parks throughout the city. And these places are what we'll be discussing today. So now I'll kind of run through a quick tour of some of New York City's most inspiring natural forests. This is where we work. This is Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, beautiful upland forest with a lot of rocky outcrops, with significant wetlands running through. Alley Pond Park in Queens. This is a pretty cute black-crowned night heron. We have a lot of birds and other wildlife that use our natural parklands. Here's Cunningham Park in Queens, a really beautiful understory here with a kind of multi-level forest, very rich. Alley Pond Park in Queens again. This is in Woodhill Park in Manhattan. I gave you that bird's eye view a minute ago. Here is what it looks like on the ground. Beautiful snowy scene. And here also, this is another shot of in Woodhill Park. Some hikers. So sadly, our forests can also look like this. This is one shot of Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx. There are other very beautiful parts of Pelham Bay Park, but this is a real place, and it's not very welcoming or accessible. Is this even a forest? That's the question. Some may classify this as a potential forest or a future forest. And then this is La Tourette Park in Staten Island, another kind of degraded area. And any practitioner here in New York City can tell you that conditions vary widely across our forests. And degraded areas like these last three slides I showed you really aren't for lack of trying. The history of forest management in New York City is actually pretty rich and something I always like to talk about. The Natural Resources Group, of which I am a part, was created in 1984 and is considered one of the oldest municipal conservation organizations in the country. Our subsequent inventory of natural areas in the 80s led to discovery of rare, threatened, and endangered plants, as well as significant stands of native trees. There was also a lot of dumping and encroachment and degradation found. So this is kind of what jump-started the work that we do. In 1991, the Urban Forest and Education Program, which was funded by the Lila Wallace and Readers Digest Fund, managed and restored 600 acres across the city with over 150,000 trees planted, and instilled a lot of perimeter protection and removed a lot of historic dumped material. In 1997, beginning in 1997, we began receiving funding for wetland restoration through the Clean Air, Clean Water Bond Acts, and ended up restoring a lot of adjacent upland habitats with that funding. In 2001, New York City Parks created a program for recognizing the most valuable natural spaces in our parkland called the Forever Wild Program that still exists today. And then in 2007 was the launch of a major initiative that I'm sure many of you have heard of called Million Trees NYC, where we planted 1 million trees throughout New York City, over half of which were planted in Natural Areas Parks. The little photo in the lower right is one aerial shot of a large planting there. And now in 2018, we're here to talk about what's next. And as Erika mentioned, we'll be discussing a new framework for forest management. So now, through our work with the Natural Areas Conservancy, we seek to answer these questions. What is the condition and distribution of nature across New York City? How are New Yorkers experiencing nature? How should we improve our degraded ecosystems? And then how can we ensure that they're resilient to the impacts of climate? We learned that New York City has a significant portion of natural habitats. Over 40% of New York City is green in one way or another, but over 10%, 11.6% of our overall land cover is natural spaces, most of which are forested. These numbers that you're seeing here do cross land ownership, so this includes property that does not belong to New York City Parks, but still it gives you kind of a picture of what's going on across our large landscape that many people might not be aware of. So the Natural Areas Conservancy embarked on a detailed ecological assessment of our forests, grasslands, and wetlands. And that ecological assessment taught us many things, some of which are summarized here. But one important thing we learned is that our forests are surprisingly healthy, but it's a dynamic system. While 3/4 of the forest canopy is native, that nativeness decreases as you move through the structural layers of the forest. We have a lot of invasive plants in the understory. And then the character of the tree seedlings starts to change as well. So we're maybe having issues with regeneration. In fact, 20% of our northern hardwood stands have no native seedlings, and even 1/3 of our successional forests have no native seedlings. So we're like seeing some trajectories here that may not be desirable for those of us that manage forests. 80% of our forests have at least one invasive plant. But it's very diverse out there. We have over 750 plants around New York City and 62 unique vegetation associations. Those include native and non-native. We have a lot of threats, though. Deer browse is becoming a big issue in New York City. Almost all of our forest assessment plots on Staten Island showed evidence of deer browse. We also have impacts from deer being seen in the Bronx as well. We still have issues with trash and dumping in the forests. If you kind of added that all up next to each other, the 273 acres of our 7,000 acres could be covered by trash. So there's a lot going on out there ecologically, and this is like the first time we're really able to understand all of it at once, at one point in time. The Natural Areas Conservancy also looked at social perceptions of natural spaces within the urban context and found some of this research, actually most of it, was done in conjunction with our partners at the Forest Service. And We found that well-managed forests are more welcoming to visitors. Parks are an important part in what people conceive of as their own personal well-being. And half of New Yorkers that were interviewed reported recreating only in New York City parkland. So, many New Yorkers get to escape the city and maybe go up to the Catskills or out to Long Island, but not everyone. And so, especially from an equity standpoint, it makes the value of this parkland even higher since so many people are using it. And this is really their only exposure to nature and not. So with this information, we jointly created a plan for comprehensive management of all of New York City's forest and natural areas. This framework was just released in April of 2018. It's available on the Natural Areas Conservancy website. You can Google New York City Forest Management Framework and find it. We'll also send out the link after this webinar. The ecological assessment data included dozens of metrics. It was an incredible amount of detail about our forest. So we came together as a large group to attempt to boil down the data. In our eyes, what makes a forest healthy and what factors threaten our forest. So you can see these metrics listed here. This is what we ended up using in the framework. So we conceive of a healthy forest of one that has native trees in every structural layer. It has a high native species richness, coarse woody debris, and leaf litter. And then threats all across our urban forest are invasive exotic species, herbaceous species in the understory, and then invasive woody trees and shrubs too. And then invasive vines climbing on trees is actually a really major problem that we have. You can see in the photo here, this young tree was previously being choked by probably a bittersweet, maybe wisteria vine. We see this a lot all over our forest, and it's one of the first things we try to deal with. And then trash and dumping. As I mentioned, we still have a problem with that. So data on each of these factors is combined and standardized so that each forest plot receives a health score and a threat score, and that allows us to compare between different parks and regions, as you can see here. So this is what that looks like across the city. Just as our practitioners have repeatedly noted, we have a highly heterogeneous landscape where forest health varies pretty widely across our 7,300 acres. But now we can compare one place to another using this matrix. I'll just walk you through it really quick. So in the lower left, we have the low health and low threat. So forests in this category have minimal threats, but there's some kind of issues still. Structure and composition metrics are not being met. So these forests could be a target for management to accelerate a transition into higher health, but maybe monitoring over time is all that's needed. Moving on to the lower right, we have low health and high threat. So these are the most degraded forests in New York City. They're categorized as the highest threat. They're probably dominated by non-native invasive species, and intensive management is needed. These are the types of places that we tackled during the Million Trees program when we really needed to find places for planting large amounts of trees. This is where we went. There's an opportunity to almost clear everything and start fresh. Moving up to the upper right quadrant, this is actually where we're starting to prioritize our work now. So forests in this category are high quality. For example, there may be a native canopy, but at the same time, there's a lot of threats going on there. For example, maybe the understory is invaded. This is where we now view management as crucial to change the trajectory here and hopefully move our forests toward, mitigate the threats before the health declines. And then upper left, forests in this category are of the highest quality. We envision that these only need monitoring to ensure that the quality remains high. So the cost of management varies with condition, with more degraded sites requiring major intervention that comes at a higher price. Probably not that surprising. So the framework also includes an assessment of historic management data to estimate cost per acre for each of these activities. And so managing forests with a contractor that's, bringing in landscape contractors that often use heavy machinery and equipment and tackle large areas of degraded forest at one time, you can see that's quite expensive. But we also use in-house staff, trained and skilled forest technicians that perform all of these same tasks, but maybe at a smaller scale. Employing them is actually cheaper for the city. So you could see that if the forests were more healthy, maybe we wouldn't need to bring in the contractors and have the higher prices. And then even their effort decreases in a healthier forest, so resulting in a lower in-house cost. And then you can see the cost of volunteer work here is very high. I always get asked about this, so I'll go ahead and tell you that the reason why it's so high is because New York City Parks really invests a lot of time and energy into ensuring that our volunteers have a meaningful and educational experience while they're stewarding our parkland. So we have a high staff to volunteer ratio. We spend a lot of time vetting and preparing sites in advance so that they're safe and enjoyable. We often provide lunch and snacks, and so for us, that little bit of extra care can go a long way, hopefully, in building a constituency for our natural spaces. So using all of this information, we are now able to estimate the comprehensive cost over time to manage the entirety of the resource. This is something that we've never really known in the past. You can imagine that maybe a politician might just be interested in the bottom line. So Parks Department, tell me, what do you need? How much does it cost? So now we can say that an investment of $385 million over 25 years sounds like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's actually not that much, would result in reduced threats and improved health across all forested parkland. And our partners at the Natural Areas Conservancy are actively involved in advocacy for our work using this framework now. So there's a lot going on in the slide. I'm just going to gloss over some of it because I want to tell you about how, while we haven't yet received the full necessary investment, we've started to implement the framework and its associated tools using our existing resources. So again, there's a lot to digest here, but it basically amounts to significant changes that we've made at New York City Parks in our site selection and monitoring. So to walk you through that very briefly, we're now referencing ecological assessment data in selecting potential work areas. So as an organization, as I mentioned, we're now prioritizing management efforts in areas of high health and high threat, and we use the ecological assessment data to point us toward those places. The Forest Management Framework also includes a tool for rapid site assessment that we've started using as pre-restoration monitoring. This checklist is included in the FMF document, and the protocol is very straightforward. We collect some kind of rapidly collected information about the threats, and we kind of characterize any potential work area before we begin work. This you definitely can't read, but just so you know, the NAC also developed a key to the ecological communities of New York City. It's a dichotomous key. We use this at our restoration sites now to determine the appropriate target for restoration. While it's unique to New York City, we imagine it's pretty applicable across a wider area, and it's also available on the Natural Areas Conservancy website. And one thing, so you can kind of imagine these things are kind of leading you up to when you might start your restoration work. So something we've always done at New York City Parks is document our work very well. We record each day's interventions in a tracking database, and we have a full record of everything that was done, how many people were there, what they accomplished, et cetera. We then also, in assigning the ecological target community type, that allows us to assign an appropriate plant palette when we complete a restoration project. So when we go to put in trees and shrubs, now that we know our ecological target, we can refer to the community of plants that live in that place and restore some or all of them to the site. And then finally, we haven't gotten to this step yet in our implementation process, but after we do restoration, we're going to complete the rapid site assessment protocol and hopefully see a nice change, at least in the reduction of threats throughout the site. So that was a really quick breeze through the forest management framework for New York City, and that's all I have today. But I'm looking forward to the rest of the presentation and hearing your questions. Thanks.